Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Atlanta Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to Atlanta Business Radio. Stone Payton and producer Blake here with you this morning. Your typical producer-host team on Walkabout. Lee Cantor is down in South Florida enjoying some time away. And I don't know what Sanjay Toure is doing, but we had to fly into big guns this time, didn't we, Blake?
Yes, we did.
This is going to be a lot of fun. All right, a little bit later in the program, we're going to hear about an exciting new restaurant concept in town and catch up with those folks. But first up on Atlanta Business Radio, please join me in welcoming to the broadcast Larry Pless and Bob Sauro. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Bob, the name of the firm, what's the name of y'all's firm?
It's Pless and Sauro PC.
Wow, very creative.
It took us a while to come up with that.
Tell me a little bit about the firm, mission, purpose. What are you guys out there trying to do for folks?
Well, we're business lawyers, and we do everything from if one person or a group of people want to start a company all the way up through if you're buying or selling your company. And we like to work closely with businesses, large and small, and advising them and helping them make good decisions, both legally and then also what we're going to talk about today is making sure that the deal they think they have find its way into a binding contract for them.
Nice. All right. So did you and Larry jump into this thing together when you built the firm, or did one of you start it and the other one jump on? How did that unfold?
Yeah, I'll let Larry give a little background. He was in first.
Yes, a group of us left another firm, Neely and Player, and set up in March of '92, and Bob immediately joined us, and we've been working together ever since. So together we have 70 years combined together work experience, all in the same area of business transactions.
So business law, I've been involved in small businesses all of my life. Some of them failed. They flopped. A couple of them were successful. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this work that I'm doing with the Business Radio X network. I suspect there are a great many things that never even crossed my mind. What are some things that small business owners just often neglect to think about or act on when they're getting their thing off the ground?
Well, it's interesting. Some of it depends on the industry, but we have a fairly long startup list when a business first comes to us or they first file, either their articles of organization or
like a checklist, things they should go through.
Yes. And it's about 30 items. And what we always say is you at least want to know the things are out there, even if your budget doesn't allow you to do them all at once. So for instance, one point there is a trademark filing. And that's one thing that sometimes a business that's just getting off the ground may not have the funds to do that right away, but you want to consider that. And that's really any business these days. You want to try to protect your brand, and you would make a filing with the United States Patent and Trademark Office for trademark protection.
So this is kind of expensive. I guess expensive is in the eye of the beholder, but it is something that ought to be on the list and should be given some attention pretty quickly. Is that restricted to folks that have a physical product, or should a consultant, someone who's selling intangible stuff, should they be trademarking stuff as well?
Yeah, you certainly should consider it because the benefits are so great if you make the registration as opposed to not. You can get things such as attorney's fees if someone infringes your mark, and it allows you to sue in federal court. Certainly if you're going to spend $1 million manufacturing a product and making labels, you want to have clearance of that mark, so that you don't wind up spending $1 million and then find out you're infringing on someone else.
Ouch. But no, you wouldn't say that if it hadn't happened, right? These things happen.
Sure. No, it happens all the time. And lots of times it's a close call. The layman might look and on their own and say, well, I really don't, see any marks that are that similar, or my products are a little different, but it's a more skilled review that's needed.
So I've got a layperson story for you. I wish I'd have hung on to it. I threw it away Friday. We checked the mail Friday. We don't check it very often. We get this thing in the mail, Patent and Trademark Office. We open it up, and it tells us about our trademark expiring. Now, we've had our trademark for, 12, 14 years. And I knew that a couple of years ago, I went and did like the refiling thingy bobber and all that stuff. And it wanted to charge me a whole bunch of money. And Lee is better than I am at sniffing out scams. And he says, I don't think this is real, man. I don't think we have to pay. It was like $1,650 for this class and $850. And so, fortunately, we got on the phone with the real United States Patent and Trademark Office. And she said, no, and you can't even do anything for another year. And then when you do, it's going to be $425 or something. So we need to let the folks out there know this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, that happens. And sometimes, I don't know if I'd say it's a scam. Sometimes what that is are just companies, because the information is public once your trademark is filed. So they just scour the databases. They see when someone's coming up for their renewal, and they hope that you get that letter and say, oh my gosh, I need to renew. Here are these people. Looks like they'll do it for me. But yeah, you certainly don't need to do it with them.
Right. Well, I'm going to call it a scam because they're taking my $1,650 and maybe they really will pay my $425 thing, right? So anyway.
It does happen too. I will mention the Georgia Secretary of State. There'll be a similar thing because each year, if you have a corporation, an LLC, you need to renew with the Georgia Secretary of State. And from time to time, letters will come out from the Georgia Secretary of State saying, beware, we understand people are sending letters, and you don't need a company like that to renew your filing.
And if you have a business law firm in your corner, you can always pick up the phone and ask them about it, or you can, let them look at stuff and decide what to do. So yeah, you started to talk about contracts. Let's talk about contracts. This too, I got to be honest with you, man. Contracts scare the hell out of me. And my only real experience with contracts is writing up sort of scope of work for consulting firms back when I had something closer to a real job. And even now, some of our studio partners will write up like agreements for the shows that they're hosting and sponsoring for us. But yeah, talk to me a little bit about contracts, some of the do's and the don'ts.
Sure. I'll say one thing about scope of work because that was on our prepared materials for today, and then I'll let Larry give an overview of contracts. But one thing to be careful with the scope of work, because I do a lot of that work with consultants too, is you'll often put a lot of those details on an Exhibit A, the scope of the work, how much you're going to be paid. Very important, the ownership of the intellectual property, because as a consultant, you're an independent contractor, and you want to make sure you don't inadvertently hand over your intellectual property to a company that you're doing work for. So all those things often go on the Exhibit A scope of work. And what I see a lot is that there are blanks left. And that's really problematic if you go to enforce the agreement. So be careful that you...
Like literal blanks in the text?
Yeah, sometimes...
Not a good idea for contracts.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'd be surprised. Sometimes
deadly.
even on the
deadly.
scope of the work as to like what we're going to do, I'll say, well, why isn't that filled in? I'll get the answer. Well, we're still working on it, or they're waiting for some direction, or they have a general statement, but it's really not what the person's going to do. But I think Larry could talk more to that.
Yeah, I'll talk about the big picture. We have what I call the 4 horsemen. Anytime we're approaching a contract, we like to back up from the document, not get lost in the weeds, and ask about 4 things. What are the goals? What are we really trying to accomplish? Which is not always obvious, by the way. Secondly, what are the fears? What are the realistic fears and maybe unrealistic fears? And then as it comes to risk, what is the likelihood and what's the magnitude? Very important. You don't want to waste your time on something that has an extremely low likelihood or an extremely low magnitude. Every contract has to have and cover all essential terms. And if it doesn't have all essential terms, you've got a nothing. And it's like being pregnant or alive. There are no degrees. You either are or you aren't. So if you have a single blank on something important, and we've seen this happen over and over, you may have a nothing and not know it until you get to the courthouse. So very important. So you want to have all essential terms. We have a rule in the office we call the so easy to say rule, which is if that's what you meant, say it and write it out.
I like that. So easy
and
to
say
say
it clearly. And sometimes you actually begin the sentence with, for the avoidance of doubt, so-and-so, the sky is blue. It doesn't hurt. Just say it. And then finally, there are all sorts of special rules that apply in different situations. So, for example, famously, everybody knows about non-competes and all the special rules that apply to them, but there are other areas of special rules that can really trip you up, such as implied warranties if you're selling a good or a product that apply whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. And we had somebody once brag that they didn't give any warranties with their products because they just refused to give warranties. Well, guess what? You're giving implied warranties whether you know it or not. So you need to know it, and you need to know the rules for disclaiming those implied warranties. There might be rules relating to being in a special area, like a contract to do something illegal. Absolutely.
How does that go?
Well, there's actually a statute that says a contract to do an illegal act is unenforceable. Contracts in support of gambling are unenforceable. But you may have a beautiful document that somebody's real proud of that they drafted very beautifully that talks about spreading the risks among a gambling enterprise. Not going to be enforceable.
So are there one or two things that just you roll your eyes every time you see it, and you just, here we go again, the Stone guy, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he just doesn't have a clue. And here we go. Are there one or two things that just mistakes that a lot of small business people tend to make when we try to pull this off on our own?
The one thing we see over and over, I can't tell you how many times we've heard it, is don't worry about non-competes. They're not enforceable. It's absolutely incorrect. Since May 11th of 2011, we've had a new statute in Georgia that caused the pendulum to swing all the way from the left to the right of enforceability. And so the likelihood of being able to make one of those binding now, as long as it was signed after May 11th of 2011, very high. You should respect them. So it's a little bit like a venomous animal. You want to give it full breadth. You don't want to get too close. And so we see that a lot. And we also see a lot of surprises when people rely on stationery store forms and when people rely on something they got through the mail as a document buster. We've had situations where people were very proud. They got into a dispute and they said, don't have to worry because we're 80-20 owners. And the person I'm in a dispute with has got 20%, so I've got 80, so I'm majority. I should be able to rule the roost. And then buried deep in the stationery store form or something they ordered online, it says each of the shareholders shall have one vote. Boom, deadlock. Now you're as if you're two bucks with your antlers.
So do you guys get to do, I know the answer to this, I'm going to ask it anyway, as much work from cradle to grave that you would like to, or do you find that a lot of your work is remedial? Like I've come to you with a problem because I've screwed something up.
Seems like lately it's been more remedial, unfortunately. So we do get, historically we've had a lot of cradle to grave, and it's really satisfying when you help someone form a company and then sell it, 4 or 5 years later, and they get, a big cash out at the closing. But I think it relates to the point you were just asking about, too. One of the other big things we see that's problematic is somebody granting someone ownership in their company, even if it's just 5% or 10%, before they talk to us, and even before they even have all the deals worked out, as to what's going to go along with that. Is the other person going to put money in for it? Or are they going to commit to work 30 hours a week in exchange for it? There's a lot of legal and also tax issues there. So anything like that, even though, sometimes we understand the business part of it where someone gets excited or they feel like they have a partner that they really need, and so they want to bring them in. But it's just a complicated step. And we also have alternatives where you can often accomplish that goal without granting actual ownership to the person.
Oh, I want to hear more about that in a minute, but I got a quick question. What about oral contracts? I tell Blake, look, Blake, you pushed all the right buttons. You get this thing broadcasting for us. You get it recorded. And, man, I'll give you 20% of every nickel that comes in the door. I mean, can he hold me to that maybe, depending on?
One of our favorite topics. So Oral contracts since the early 1800s are enforceable in Georgia according to the memory of the witnesses. And then there are special rules. They've got a name called Statute of Frauds. There are special rules for contracts relating to certain sensitive areas that have to be in writing, such as sale of lands or a contract to marry or guarantee the debt of another or sale of goods more than $500, things like that. But interestingly, you didn't mention for what time period. And so, for example, if you said forever,
till I get tired of paying him,
okay,
right? But no, that's what's in my mind, right?
You actually stumbled upon two really important ideas, because the other thing is a contract of hiring for an indefinite term. So if you'd said perpetually, you would have had two problems there. You got an oral contract, and you've also got an indefinite term, which is a contract at will, and therefore may only be enforceable until terminated by the other party.
Wow.
So you got several things operating there, and I would certainly say be careful. There's a very instructive and fascinating case involving Ted Turner's family. It's the McDavid case, $450 million Atlanta Hawks sale. So they had been negotiating documents for months with a fellow named David McDavid. They had a lot of the documents prepared. The Hawks had prepared press releases internally. The lawyers had told the other lawyers, come to Atlanta, let's finalize the documents. We got a few surmountable issues we got to handle to do with employee benefits, but we're basically there. Unbeknownst to David McDavid, they were also simultaneously negotiating with Ted Turner's son-in-law at the same time and didn't mention that detail. And so at the end, pulled out. And the Georgia Court of Appeals said $450 million in damages for breach of this contract, even though none of the documents was signed.
Wow.
So be careful. You would think something of that complexity that obviously involves some kind of land, because I mentioned you have to have a written contract for sale of land, but they didn't go for it. I think the fact that there was duplicity involved and the secret negotiations going on with an insider had something to do with the decision. Maybe shouldn't have, but to me that was just a stunning decision.
Yeah, it is stunning.
And very stunning, I'm sure, to the ones who ended up paying the judgment, and they did.
All right, so let's go back to making Blake rich. So you were talking about maybe there's some ways to accomplish that same sort of flavor of deal, get him fired up, get him inspired. Maybe I don't have to come out with a lot of out-of-pocket cash upfront salary. But I think you suggested there's a way to structure something similar without giving him actual equity. So talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, so a couple of the options there, particularly in that situation, are one, just not giving ownership in the corporation or the LLC, but just giving a contractual right for him to earn some money if he accomplished certain milestones. So if you're looking to give him essentially 10% of the profits if he gets 3 new stations set up for you, rather than give him 10% ownership, you have a contract that says upon these 3 stations being successfully launched, you get 10% of the profits that flows from them. And that can just be a contractual bonus situation or just a promise to pay without you having to worry that now you have a minority shareholder who can ask for all your financials of the company or call meetings or
a fiduciary duty of
I don't
loyalty
want
to that
sell.
person as a minority shareholder.
Yeah. Or tie up a decision, like you say, all of a sudden he's got as big a voice in the decision as Lee and I do.
Well, hopefully he wouldn't have that 1 vote per person drafted in. And of course, one of the other things you'd want to do is limit this right to receive so long as they're a full-time employee in good standing, and put some kind of box around it. So, and there are some other avenues you might mention. So,
yeah, lay a couple more on me if some come to mind.
Yeah, there are others, phantom stock plans, things like that, particularly if you have more than one person that you're talking about. You can set up a plan, again, that isn't actual ownership, but where the person is going to enjoy the economic benefit without the ownership. We've actually had some situations where someone is bringing in somebody as a 10% owner, maybe 15% owner, and you would think the person coming in would want the ownership, and sometimes they're happy just to get the the 15% of the profits without the worry of being an owner and the other things that come with it. So I don't know, oftentimes that deal is struck, unfortunately now, before it comes to us, but there are options you can work through that would fit the situation.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of phantom options because so often you'll have a dominant personality who is the entrepreneur, and it really is their company psychologically. And we've just seen entanglements and suffering result when you get an imbalance there between the true energy behind the corporation or the LLC and the ownership. And you can satisfy this because it's often a very driving need. So-and-so is so important to me, and I want to make sure they're rewarded. Well, you can do it in ways that don't involve issuance of equity, or particularly in ways that don't involve starting to give voting rights. That's when it really changes things. I'll also return to something I mentioned earlier. When you have a minority shareholder, you owe a fiduciary duty of loyalty and care to them to put their interests ahead of your own. So you've really tipped the balance suddenly by bringing in somebody as a shareholder or a minority interest holder in an LLC.
Aye. So with all of this, I'm delighted that I can go back actually, and I can, next Wednesday I can go listen to this broadcast, right? Because we capture it and record it. But a typical small business owner, they can't keep all this in their head. So the bottom line is they should engage professional counsel. I mean, that's what we're saying there. There's some things that we ought to keep in mind, maybe look out for. And let's cover a couple of those before we wrap. But what I'm sensing for me, do you feel the same way, Blake?
Yeah, I do.
Don't try to do this yourself. This is not right?
This is just too much work to do on your own. Yeah, there's no way you can possibly do this on your own as a small business owner. So
in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to kind of leave us just with some, just some things to look out for, keep in mind as small business owners. But before we go there, I mean, given that there is so much complexity and you really do need to be a professional to stay tapped into this knowledge base, I mean, does the phone just ring off the hook for you guys? Or how does the whole sales and marketing thing work for a firm like yours that's out there trying to help folks like me?
We find that a great deal of our business comes from other professionals, particularly CPAs. We have great working relationships with a number of CPAs, and then also other lawyers, particularly when they develop conflicts where they represent an adverse party and can't take on a matter. And of course, we have historical. We've been kicking around now for 70 years cumulatively, so we've got historic relationships as well.
You started when you were 14.
14 years old. So we might mention a few quick things about negotiation because I think it ties into this, and it might be helpful.
Well, I wish you would. I'm horrible at negotiating. I mean, I really am. It's just not a superpower of mine at all.
Well, a couple of quick things we've learned over time, sometimes the hard way. The first is don't take take it or leave it approach. It doesn't work with Americans. They want to shape the outcome, even if it's worse than the outcome they could have gotten just by somebody imposing it on them. Next, be aware of something called tit-for-tat negotiation, which is you start cooperatively, but if you meet something that's aggressive, even if it's disguised with a smile or a casual comment, meet it appropriately, not disproportionately, and then crucially bring it back to the table with some humor. Don't let it escalate. Third, when somebody tells you they got to have something, they're often telling you the truth. Our experience is they're being sincere. So remember that. It doesn't mean you don't trade mightily for it and get just as good or better in return, but listen to the things they tell you they really got to have. Next, we found, particularly when it comes to the risk-shifting negotiations that come along in acquisitions, which is one of our favorite legal activities, taking a bundled, persistent, disciplined approach where you keep presenting the same important issues that matter to you all the way up to the closing table, even if you haven't gotten them all yet, can sometimes pay off. We've been in situations where we've continued to present an issue as something important to us and literally gotten it written in at the last moment, even though it was first raised 6 months earlier, and then 3, 4, 5 years out, having it really matter on something important. So be persistent, and details do matter. And then, we got 3 kinds of chips that we're dealing with in negotiations: blue chips, bargain chips, and potato chips. Know which ones you're dealing with. Don't wait until you're knee deep in the negotiation to figure out which ones are which. Otherwise, the other side's going to do it for you, and you're going to get dragged along through their agenda. So know what's important to you early on, and personally identify them.
Blue chips, bargain chips.
That's not original to me.
I'm going to quote you, or either maybe I won't quote you. I'll just say it.
Some you got to have, some you got to trade, and others you can use as window dressing.
I love it. All right, but this does open up another set of questions I have before we wrap. When do you involve the attorney in these conversations? Because it can create a different atmosphere, right? If you show up with your attorney, right? So we're going to have a guest here in a moment, Brian Bullock. Let's say I'm talking to Brian Bullock, about some sort of radio show. And we started talking about what it could look like. And then I said, you know what? We'll meet at 2:00 and I'll have my lawyers with me. Right. So
yeah, I wouldn't do it that way.
Okay.
So one of the most important things you can remember from this show is think non-binding proposed terms. We see so much suffering from people who say, I'm going to make you an offer. And then you come back and say, well, I'm going to accept that offer. That's way premature. All contracts should come out, anything that's important typically is going to come out of a setting where you explore it by throwing out terms. And so go ahead and work on a term sheet. You don't need to start the legal meter running too early, and work out the basics of the deal. And do it in a context where everybody understands these are non-binding, they're just proposed terms, these are just discussions. Whatever we're talking about is just discussions. Nobody's going to be bound until and unless we have a contract with all the blanks filled in, all the schedules and the exhibits filled in. And I think if as a business person you know that and you've got a format of a term sheet and you feel reasonably competent in dealing with customers or suppliers, you can get going and save some time before presenting it to a lawyer to get involved. But I would definitely approach it that way before. It can be sort of a mood killer to get a lawyer involved too early.
Non-binding proposed terms.
And you're very clear about it. The preamble says the proposed non-binding, the following terms are proposed for discussion purposes only. And just lay out the 5, 6, or 7 things important to you. And particularly if there's something that's real sensitive and you feel a little waffling on it, you can make a strategic decision whether to go ahead and press on that, maybe without going into all the other terms. But you need to go ahead and get it settled because it's really important to you, particularly if you feel like there's some lack of enthusiasm or confusion or waffling going on. And that can save you some steps later on. So you don't discover, so often, I think Bob mentioned this best, hidden unenforceability is our mantra, but also hidden disagreement. I remember spending 2 hours at a negotiation table one day with a client who said, get out here now to the perimeter. I was downtown. If you don't get out here, I'm going to go without you, but I got to have this. We sat at the table for 2 hours. My head was spinning. And finally, at the end, I said, it sounds to me like you want to have the option to give us an option. He said, that's it. I said, let's go. So it was a nothing. And the sooner they got to that realization, the faster they could make better use of their time and go do something else. It was an exercise in futility.
Well, this has been an exercise in interest and intrigue, and I'm at least myself sort of recommitted to the idea of let the pros do what the pros do. But this has been very helpful. Thank you both, gentlemen. If our listeners want to learn more, have a substantive conversation with one of you two or somebody on your team, what's the coordinates? What's the best way for them to do that?
Our website is www.pless, Pless, and the word and spelled out, Sauro, SAURO.com. And we're in the top floor of the Queen Building in Sandy Springs.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you both, gentlemen.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, it's been a delight.
Hey, stay with us. We're going to visit with one more guest.
Thank you.
All right, Blake, you ready for the headliner?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if he was as scared as I was in that last segment or not. We'll find out in just a minute. But this is going to be a lot of fun. Please join me in welcoming to the show with Legacy Ventures, COO, Restaurants, Mr. Brian Bullock. How are you, man?
Good morning, gentlemen.
It is good to visit with you. That conversation around contracts, man. I saw you nodding your head a few times.
Unfortunately, learned from mistakes in my career. So these two gentlemen are very valuable in the business side of anything. And it's not just small companies. We bring in attorneys for everything. We brought in an attorney last week to rework on all of our catering contracts, just because we've had a couple of things come up. So it's highly important, and they're intelligent, and let them do their job.
So you guys have a new concept coming out. Yeah. Tell us all about it.
We're doing something called Dos Bocas, which means two mouths. Comes from it's a Cajun and Mexican Tex-Mex concept, something we've wanted to do for a long time. I used to work for a company called Border Cafe Restaurants, and that was a very similar style restaurant up in Boston, New Jersey, and Delaware. The original one was right in Harvard Square. The founder of our company went to MIT. He used to hang out there a lot. So it's something we've always worked with and we wanted to do. I worked for a restaurant company called Houston's Restaurants, and I was a general manager in New Orleans and a general manager in Houston, and really got into that vibe of food and really saw how close they are together. If you think about going from Lafayette, Louisiana to Houston, it's a few hours and you encompass all of that great food. So we had an opportunity. We had a tenant in one of our buildings called Legal Seafood, which is actually out of Boston, and their lease ended at the end of 2018. And we decided to take the opportunity and start working on Dos Bocas and getting ready to open it. We're going to open it late summer, and we're excited about it.
So how do you guys come up with the menu? I mean, this takes a lot of thought and energy and careful attention, right? You have like some sort of structured process with some rigor to it?
We do. Back in February, I grabbed a couple of our corporate chefs and some of our operations people, and we flew into New Orleans on Tuesday morning, and we ended in San Antonio on Friday night, and did a literally tour through the country of what we were talking about, and got everyone energized and everyone sort of focused on what we wanted to do. We've been doing menu tastings now for 4 months. We just keep on working on it. We make sure we don't give ourselves a really difficult deadline to hit. Let's make sure it's correct. Let's make sure it's right. Get the correct people in there running the operation. And this is where we're at now. We've been working on it a while, but once again, this is a project that's been near and dear to our hearts. I love the food. I love the style of it. So it's good to finally get it going.
So having good food, I'm sure that's critical. I'll share with you a very personal experience. Family, friends, successful in the professional consulting arena, retired, had a little bit of capital, opened a restaurant, food was great. They lost their shirts because, it just wasn't their world. They didn't know what they were doing, I guess, on all the other fronts, but there's a lot more to it than just having the right menu, right?
There is. You need to have service, food, systems, organization. We're in the business of pennies, not dollars, and you just need to have to really watch it, have a great team, have great development, have great ability to see what's going on. Also be able to change. Anyone can have their passion and they want to do it, but that passion may not translate all that well to the public. So you need to be able to be nimble. One of the things that we look at our company, we strive for is to be nimble. This is our 18th food and beverage operation across 4 states. We're both in the hotel sector and the single standalone restaurant sector. And in every situation, we look at what does the area need? How can we handle it? How does the property work? We have restaurants in some hotels. We wish it could be different, but the physical plan of the building won't allow that. And so you need to be able to really focus, be nimble, and realize you can't take your eye off the ball. There's a reason why they label it a tough business, but very rewarding and fun.
Well, you mentioned pennies, not dollars. You're referring to the margins are just thin. You really do have to be on top of it.
Yeah, you really have to be on top of it. You figure 20% margin on a good day is not something that you can take your eyes off of.
Well, exact opposite.
And very labor intensive.
Okay. So. Exact opposite, by the way, compared to most consulting firms. Yeah. Most consulting firms, we didn't have to be really great business people because the margins are obscene. Yeah. And sometimes, we felt like we delivered the value that justified all that, but we did not have to watch that.
When you sit there and go, your typical labor cost is 35%, your typical food cost is 30%. You've taken a bunch of your P&L out just with those 2 items, and there's everything else. And as we talked earlier, getting great attorneys in to help you with your leases, with your contracts, with your labor contracts. It's really important because little mistakes can really take down a business. So
it's fun to hear the story the way you framed it up, but there are subplots and other things I'm sure that happened as you decided let's take a swing at something different when the lease was up. are there certain levers that cause you to say, yep, it's time to launch a new concept. It's time to take a swing.
Yeah, once again, we have a few concepts in what I would consider in our wheelhouse that we want to do, and we just look for the right location. I mean, an example before this was our concept called Twin Smokers Barbecue and Bourbon. We wanted to do that for many years, and finally an opportunity came up that we thought was the right spot. We're not trying to force it. We just want to make sure the right location. We like this location that's down right across from the aquarium, 275 Baker Street. We think it fits this concept well. It's 2 stories, have a great bar downstairs, get some food down there, dining upstairs, really great for private events. Downtown Atlanta is a different animal compared to a lot of markets in this city. We have very convention and event driven. We have an unbelievable ebb and flow of business. And fortunately, with the quantity of hotels and restaurants down there, we've gotten pretty solid at handling that ebb and flow. And we talk to our event managers. We talk to our customers. What are you looking for? What do you want next for your clients? Because you have these people that bring in conventions and meetings every year, and they're looking for something that they knew, something that they can bring that client back to downtown Atlanta and give them a new experience. And everyone we've talked to thinks this will be a home run for what they're looking for in that genre. So we're ready for it.
Well, I can tell. I mean, your passion for it comes through. You really do enjoy your work. So you touched on it a moment ago, but what's your backstory, man? How did you get to this?
So, I'm a Irish Catholic from Boston, come from a huge family. My mother's the oldest of 11. My dad's youngest at 12. I'm one of 110 first cousins. Literally, my mother's from an island called Prince Edward Island in Canada, Eastern Shore, Canada. Pulled out of school in 7th grade to cook for the family and take care of, they had the general store from 52 to last year, Eugene's General Store.
Wow.
So, our house, when she moved to Boston, married my dad, just was always the entertaining house. And when you have families that big, there's a lot of entertaining going on. Whether it's getting together, whether it's a wedding, whether it's a funeral, there's always entertaining. I just got the bug for it. Cooked all through high school, went to Johnson & Wales for cooking. Left there, went out to UMass Amherst for management, and then took a job with Houston's Restaurants right out of college. Wanted to stay on the East Coast right before the Olympics, came down to Atlanta, and that started the career. Went from Atlanta to New Orleans. Absolutely love working for Houston's in New Orleans, a great restaurant right on St. Charles. Really understood. I think New Orleans is as solid as a hospitality town. It's a great restaurant town. There's great restaurant towns in this country. But their hospitality there, they care about it so much. They just care about the food. They care about the service. They care about the customer. They care about the experience. And it really opens your eyes. And then jumping from there over to Houston, although Houston I wouldn't consider the sexiest city in the United States, it has a lot going on. It's a booming city, and there's a really, really great, vibrant restaurant scene there. So that just got my blood going. And then I left Houston's and I went to take over this company called Border Cafe Restaurants, and which is Cajun and Tex-Mex. Started in the early 70s right in Harvard Square in Boston, and it's been going solid. And how I knew about it growing up in Boston, it's where all the chefs would go, frankly, drink late night. And, the restaurant was open late, and we'd all hang out over there and have a good time. It's an institution in Boston and in New Jersey, and something that I worked there from till about 2007. My wife's from Savannah. Always wanted to get back down to Georgia, and had an opportunity to come back down to Georgia, and we're here and we're not staying. So I'm sorry, we're here, we're not leaving.
Legacy Ventures, they have quite the pedigree as well, right?
Yeah, we've been around. So David Marvin founded our company about 25 years ago. We were really the first small developers in downtown Atlanta. Started with the Embassy Suites right on Centennial Park, and have been very active and passionate about downtown. We always knew that, it's let's face it, the reputation of downtown has been challenged for some time in Atlanta.
Sure.
It's really starting to come around. We just got a nice apartment complex down there with post Centennial Park coming online. And so he's been very passionate about it, and he's developed condos, all different types of real estate, but we've really matured into what we would consider a hospitality, development company. So we own hotels, we operate them for other people. We build them. We don't operate them. We really we can own, develop, build, get you the brand, find the funding, put the concepts in, and any and all above. So you say we're in 4 states now. We're in Texas. We're in Madison, Wisconsin, Chattanooga, and Atlanta. And we just look for the right project. We like to specialize in full service hotels on the hotel side. We think we have a great niche on that because we have a restaurant division, and it's worked out great for us.
So before we wrap, help me envision this from a sales and marketing lens, because you guys are obviously really good at it. And I think there are lessons that we can take, probably some parallels in what you guys do so well that many of us in completely different businesses can try to emulate. Talk about how you'll launch this, how you'll promote it, and get it off the ground, if you would.
Well, I think the first thing was having an authentic story. This is truly something we wanted to do. We lived it. We worked it. So we had a great concept. Then find the right person. We interviewed a lot of PR companies, and we ended up with Phase 3. We love them because they're in downtown Atlanta. They're passionate about it. They care about it. They have great clients. So going through that process and then working through the story with them and let the experts get it off the ground. Let them tell us when to do the announcements. Let them tell us when to come on the radio. Let them show us and lead us the way. We can handle the food and beverage, and we're great at that. And then our director of marketing and our director of sales, we all keep everyone involved. We have weekly meetings on this, development meetings every Thursday. We eat, we drink, and we talk about Dos Bocas. So if you're ever bored on 1:00 on Thursdays, come on downtown. Don't schedule meetings after it. So we, and I think the most important thing I touch on, we realize in what we do, there are so many little things that can happen that we can't control. So let's not give us an unrealistic time schedule to open. Let's be very intelligent about what can happen. I'll give you a story. We opened up a restaurant called Twin Smokers. I added a hand sink for a cook to wash his hands after we got our permit set approved. And we failed when they came in to do it because I had one extra hand sink. And that delayed us months.
Wow.
We had to resubmit all of our plans. We had to go through a whole nother approval. And I'm sitting there going, all I did was add a hand sink for people to wash their hands.
You would think it'd be a good thing,
and
right?
Because that wasn't on the plan, that literally, is something I was on the board of the Georgia Restaurant Association, for many years, was the chairman a couple of years ago. And it was something that we've always really tried to streamline and make easier, because what we do is hard. And, so we make sure we don't give ourselves a hard deadline. Get it right, get it open when we're ready.
Well, first of all, I got to echo your sentiments about Phase 3. If Phase 3 comes to us with a potential guest, it's an automatic yes. They're always bringing us really compelling stories, folks that know their stuff, and are a lot of fun to have a conversation with, and you're no exception. So thank you for that, and thank you to Phase 3. So what is your timeline on this one?
We're looking late summer.
Late summer, okay.
Yeah, we're giving late summer. We're getting close. Construction's well on its way. Once again, this was a second-generation space, so we're not having to put bathrooms in. We're not having to put, utility in and all that. So,
and you've learned your hand sink lesson.
I've learned my hand sink lesson, trust me. And so we're looking at late summer to get this thing open, but we'll get the announcements going as we feel a little bit more comfortable and get the hiring going, and so we're ready.
Fantastic. So then the address is stable. So what's the address again? I think you mentioned
275 Baker Street. It's in what we call the Pavilion Building. It's anchored by a Hilton Garden Inn, and then there's Game X's at the bottom of it.
Yeah, okay.
It's directly across from the aquarium.
Right.
So but parking right on site. Just want to let everyone know, because we always hear
No,
that
that's
about
a biggie,
downtown.
right?
We validate parking. The garage is in the building. You can't get lost. So we think that's important.
Well, fantastic, man. Keep up the good work. One more time, the name of the restaurant and the location.
Dos Bocas at 275 Baker Street in downtown Atlanta.
Well, it has been an absolute delight having you come in and tell us about it, man. Thanks, you.
Stone. It's fun. Thanks for having us.
All right. Until next time, this is Stone Payton for producer Blake and everyone here at the Business Radio X family saying we'll see you next time on Atlanta Business Radio.